Thomas Hale had lived alone for so long that even the sound of his own voice sometimes surprised him. His ranch sat far out on the Arizona land, where the sun rose wide and bright, and the evenings carried long stretches of quiet. Most days began the same way for him. He woke before sunrise, listened to the soft breathing of the horses in the stable, and then stepped outside to check the sky. He had learned that the sky always told him what kind of day it would be. If it was clear, he knew the heat would be steady. If clouds gathered, he prepared for a day of watching the cattle carefully. His life had become a pattern, steady but lonely, like the slow spin of a windmill turning in the same direction for years. Thomas was not an unfriendly man. He simply did not talk much. Life had pushed him toward silence. Years ago, when he first started building the ranch, he imagined a different future. He pictured a home full of conversation, shared meals, maybe even the laughter of children running through the yard. But things changed. As life often does, people he cared about had moved away, some had passed on, and the ranch became the only thing he had left to hold on to. It had become his anchor, his companion, and sometimes even his excuse to stay away from the world. Every part of the ranch needed work fences that loosened over time, cattle that wandered, tools that needed fixing. Thomas accepted all of it. Work kept his hands busy and his mind calm. He liked the rhythm. Riding out across the land, feeling the warm air on his face, hearing the soft steps of his horse on dry soil. He liked the way the landscape stretched endlessly around him, as if the earth itself gave him space to think. But he also felt the weight of being alone. It was a quiet he never complained about, yet one he never escaped. The nearest town was miles away. Thomas rarely visited, except when supplies ran low. When he did go, he spoke only when necessary. The shopkeeper knew him well. "Same things as always?" she would ask, and Thomas would nod. People in town respected him, but they also sensed the distance he kept. He was a man who lived in his own world, and no one tried to step into it. Evenings were the loneliest. After the day's work ended, Thomas would sit on the small porch with a tin cup of coffee. He watched the sky turn orange, then purple, then deep blue. The stars came out one by one, as if keeping him company from a distance. Sometimes he remembered times when he wasn't alone, the days before life became heavy, but he never stayed with those memories long. They made the quiet feel even quieter. The ranch house itself was simple. A wooden table, a few chairs, a bed, and shelves with tools and old books he hardly touched anymore. Dust gathered on many things because there was no one else to clean or move them. His life was stable, predictable, and safe from surprises. Thomas believed he preferred it that way. Yet deep down, there was a part of him that wondered if this was all life had for him. Sometimes he spotted tracks near his land, footprints or wagon marks, but he never paid much attention. Travelers passed through the area often enough. He figured they were people making their way to other places, people with lives full of movement and purpose. He never imagined any of them would bring change to his quiet world. On one warm afternoon, Thomas was repairing a section of fence far from the house. The wind carried the faint smell of desert plants, and a few birds circled overhead. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and continued working, pushing a wooden post deeper into the ground. The sun beat down, but he was used to it. Hard work was a comfort to him. As he hammered the post into place, he noticed something odd on the ground, a fresh set of small footprints. They were lighter than the prints of a grown man, spaced in a way that suggested a child had walked there recently. He paused, studying them. They were too close to his property to ignore. But Thomas was not a man who jumped to conclusions. He simply nodded to himself, finished the fence, and returned to the house with the thought tucked away in the back of his mind. In the nights that followed, Thomas felt something unusual in the air. The silence was the same, but it carried a feeling he couldn't name, like a shift in the wind before a storm. He ignored it, telling himself he was imagining things. Still, he found himself listening more carefully than usual, to the sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of animals, the soft hum of the breeze. Everything felt normal, yet something inside him kept waiting. He woke earlier than usual one morning, feeling restless. After feeding the horses, he took his coffee to the porch. The sky was pale with the first light of dawn, and the land stretched out peacefully. It was the same view he had seen for years. Yet this morning it felt different, almost expectant. Thomas sipped his coffee and tried to shake off the strange feeling. The truth was, Thomas had forgotten what change felt like. When you live alone for years, even a small shift can feel enormous. And though he didn't know it yet, his life was on the edge of one of those shifts. As the day warmed, he rode out to check on some cattle grazing near the stream. His horse walked calmly, and Thomas let his thoughts drift. Life on the ranch could be tiring, but it was honest work. He believed he had accepted his fate as a solitary man. But fate, as life often proves, doesn't ask for permission. Later that afternoon, as he returned to the house, he noticed movement near the old cottonwood tree by the fence. A shadow at first, small, quick, and unfamiliar. Thomas slowed his horse, watching closely. He saw the shape again. Someone was there. He felt a flicker of caution, but not fear. He knew the land well, and strangers rarely caused trouble here. He climbed down from his horse and approached slowly. The closer he got, the clearer the scene became. A woman stood near the tree, tall and calm, her posture steady. Beside her was a young boy, holding onto her clothing with a quiet, uncertain look. They seemed tired, as if they had traveled far. The woman's eyes met Thomas's, steady and brave, as though she had made a difficult decision and was ready to face whatever came next. Thomas stopped a short distance away. He didn't speak right away. The woman didn't speak either. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, both aware that something important was happening even though neither knew what it meant yet. This was the moment that would shift everything in Thomas's life. He didn't understand it yet, but the long years of silence behind him were about to change. The quiet world he had built around himself was about to open not through force or accident, but through the simple arrival of two strangers who needed more than a place to rest. They needed safety. They needed hope, and without knowing it, Thomas was the man they had come to find. And so his quiet life stood on the edge of transformation, waiting for the words that would soon be spoken, words that would echo in his memory for years to come. The woman standing near the cottonwood tree did not move when Thomas approached. She watched him with calm, steady eyes, as if she had already decided that this moment would change her future. The young boy by her side held tightly to her clothing, his small fingers gripping the fabric as if he feared she might walk away without him. The sight touched something in Thomas, although he didn't show it. He stopped a few steps away and waited. He did not want to frighten them. He could see from their clothing and the way they carried themselves that they were not ordinary travelers passing through. The woman looked tired, but not weak. Her posture was proud, and there was a strength in her voice even before she spoke. "My name is Naya," she said softly, but clearly. "We mean no harm." Thomas nodded slowly. His heart beat a little faster, not out of fear, but out of the unexpectedness of the moment. He had not spoken with anyone in days, and now, here stood a woman and a child on his land. It felt unreal, like a dream he did not remember falling into. He looked at the boy, who couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. The child's eyes were wide and curious, but also cautious. He held a small bundle tied with rope, perhaps everything he owned. Thomas wondered how far they had walked and how long they had been traveling. "You're far from the nearest road," Thomas said quietly. "Are you lost?" Naya shook her head. "We came here on purpose." Her words made Thomas pause. People almost never came to his ranch, unless they needed something. Sometimes it was water, sometimes directions, sometimes help repairing a wagon. But this woman did not look like someone asking for quick assistance. She looked like someone who had made a hard decision and was now ready to face whatever answer she might receive. Thomas gestured toward the shaded area near the tree. "You can rest there if you need." Naya nodded gratefully but did not sit down. Instead, she took a slow breath and said, I am an Apache widow. My husband passed many moons ago. My people have moved on to another place. I have no home left with them." Her voice did not tremble, but Thomas could sense the weight behind her words. Living alone was one thing, choosing solitude was different, but being forced into it, left with a child to care for, and nowhere to go, was something he could hardly imagine. "I traveled with my son," she continued, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "His name is Tavo. He is all I have, and I need a safe place for him." Thomas looked at the boy again. Tavo stared back with hopeful yet uncertain eyes. Thomas felt something shift inside him, something he had not felt in years. A quiet tug, almost like the soft pull of a memory. Naya stepped forward. She did not raise her voice, but her next words carried a strength that felt almost like courage, wrapped in sorrow. "I came here because I heard you are a fair man," she said. "Some people in the town spoke of you. They said you live alone, and you do no harm to anyone. I need a place where my son can grow. He needs someone to guide him. My child needs a father." The words hung in the air like a sudden wind that changes everything in a moment. Thomas blinked. He hadn't expected anything like this, not the honesty, not the bravery, not the simple way she spoke such important words. For a moment, he felt almost unsteady. He had lived alone for so long that the idea of someone seeking him out for something so meaningful felt impossible. "I'm not sure I'm the right man for that," he answered honestly. "I've lived alone a long time." Naya nodded. "I know, but I have seen men who hide from responsibility. And you are not one of them. You take care of your land. You take care of your animals. You live with honor." She paused, her eyes softening. "That is enough for me to trust." Thomas felt a quiet warmth move through him. He was not used to hearing such words, especially from a stranger. He looked at the land around him, the open sky, the quiet earth, the familiar stillness, and then back at the woman and child standing there. "You can stay for now," he said carefully. "I have spare space in the barn. You both can rest there until we figure out what's best." Naya bowed her head slightly in gratitude. Tavo's face brightened. Just a little. As if those simple words had lifted a heavy shadow from his young heart. Thomas led them toward the house, walking slowly so the child could keep up. As they approached, he noticed how Naya looked around with quiet curiosity. She seemed to study everything, the fence, the stable, the ground beneath her feet, as if she was checking whether this place could be a home. Inside the barn, Thomas cleared a space for them. He brought out a few blankets and a small bucket of water. Naya thanked him softly each time, and Tavo watched every move carefully, as if memorizing the moment. "Rest," Thomas said. "You've traveled far." Naya nodded. "Yes, but I feel safe here." Naya. Those words surprised Thomas. Safe. It had been a long time since anyone had used that word about his ranch. It made him feel something he couldn't fully name. As the day faded into evening, Thomas stepped outside and leaned against the porch railing. The sky was turning golden, and the air was warm. But tonight, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the same heavy silence he had lived with for years. Now it carried small new sounds, Naya's soft voice, the boy's laughter as he discovered a wooden bucket he pretended was a drum, and the faint rustle of footsteps as they settled in. The ranch did not feel empty anymore. Thomas felt uncertain, yet something inside him was strangely calm. He knew their arrival had changed the rhythm of his life. Whether it was for a day or for longer, he didn't know, but for the first time in many years, he felt that tomorrow might not be the same as yesterday. He did not fully understand why Naya had chosen him. He did not know what the future held, but he knew one simple truth. As the sun dipped behind the distant hills, life had brought two strangers to his door, and he could not turn them away. In the quiet glow of the evening, Thomas watched the barn, thinking of the woman's words. "My child needs a father." Those words echoed inside him long after the sky turned dark. He didn't yet know what decision he would make. But the weight of those words stayed with him like a soft whisper in the wind, reminding him that some moments in life arrive without warning yet carry the power to reshape everything. Thomas woke before sunrise the next morning, just as he always did, but something felt different. For years, he had been used to stepping outside into silence. The ranch had always been quiet at dawn, with only the soft movements of horses and the distant sound of wind passing through dry grass. But today, as he opened the door, he heard a faint noise, small footsteps, a light shuffle, and the soft voice of a child trying to whisper. It surprised him in a gentle way. Tavo was awake, sitting near the barn door with a stick in his hand, drawing circles in the dirt. When he saw Thomas, he froze for a moment, unsure whether to run or smile. Thomas gave him a small nod, and the boy relaxed a little. Soon Naya stepped out of the shadows, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. She looked tired but peaceful. For the first time in a long while, Thomas did not feel alone on his own land. He moved toward the horses, and the boy slowly followed, curious but cautious. When Thomas opened the stable door, the horses neighed softly. Recognizing him, Tavo watched with wide eyes, amazed by their size and the gentle way Thomas handled them. "You like horses?" Thomas asked quietly. Tavo nodded, his small face lighting up. Thomas handed him a brush. "You can help me. Just be gentle." The boy hesitated, then stepped forward and began brushing the horse's side the way Thomas showed him. His movements were small but careful. Thomas noticed how focused he was, how his eyes sparkled with excitement. It was a simple moment, yet it felt meaningful, as if a new energy had settled onto the ranch. Naya watched from a distance, her expression softening. She seemed relieved to see her son interacting with someone so patiently. She approached and thanked Thomas with a quiet voice. Thomas simply nodded, not knowing how to say that he didn't mind. In fact, he felt something warm inside him that he had not felt in years, a sense of company, a sense of purpose beyond the land and cattle. Later that morning, after feeding the animals, Thomas showed Naya and Tavo where the water pump was and offered them some bread and dried fruit. Naya accepted gratefully, dividing everything carefully between herself and her son. She carried herself with dignity, never asking for more than she needed, always showing respect for everything she was given. Thomas admired that. As days turned into weeks, the ranch changed in ways Thomas had never expected. Not in loud or dramatic ways, just small shifts that slowly grew into something bigger. Naya began helping in her own quiet way. She noticed things Thomas didn't. A bucket out of place, tools that needed organizing, a loose hinge on the stable door. She fixed what she could and asked permission when she needed to move something. Her presence brought a different rhythm to the ranch, a steady, gentle rhythm that blended with Thomas's routine. Tavo became braver each day. At first, he followed Thomas at a distance, but soon he began staying close, asking small questions in his soft voice. Thomas taught him simple tasks: how to gather eggs without breaking them, how to keep a steady hand when feeding the horses, how to stack wood properly. Each time Tavo succeeded, his smile grew wider. Thomas found himself talking more than usual. He explained things to Tavo, told him stories about the land, the weather, and even a few memories from his younger days. The boy listened with shining eyes, as if the stories were treasures. Thomas didn't realize it at first, but teaching the child began to fill a quiet space inside him that he had ignored for years. Naya often watched them from the doorway, her expression soft and grateful. She helped with cooking, keeping the house tidy, and gathering herbs that grew nearby. She had a way of making a place feel cared for without changing its nature. Thomas noticed the difference immediately. The house, which had always felt cold and lonely, now felt warmer, as if someone had opened a window to let sunlight in. One afternoon, a storm suddenly rolled in. The wind picked up quickly, and dark clouds gathered across the sky. Thomas hurried outside to check the herd, and before he could tell them to stay inside, Naya and Tavo appeared beside him, already offering help. Together, they worked to move tools under shelter, tie loose ropes, and close unstable doors. Tavo clung to Thomas's leg when a strong gust came through. but Thomas placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You're okay," he said softly. The storm raged through the night, but inside the house, the three of them sat near the fireplace. Naya brewed a warm drink from herbs she carried with her, and Tavo fell asleep leaning against Thomas's side. The boy's head rested gently on his arm, and Thomas didn't move. He looked at the child, then at Naya, and something inside him tightened in a way that felt both unfamiliar and deeply human. He wasn't used to being needed like this. The storm passed by morning, leaving the land washed clean. Thomas woke early as usual and stepped outside, expecting the same quiet he had known for years. Instead, he found Naya already sweeping the porch, and Tavo feeding the chickens, dropping the grains carefully as Thomas had taught him. The sight warmed him in a way he could not put into words. As the days continued, trust grew naturally between them. Thomas found comfort in hearing another voice besides his own. He enjoyed sharing meals, even the simple ones. Tavo often brought him small surprises, a shiny stone he found, a feather from the field, or a drawing he made in the dirt. Naya brought stories of her childhood, stories of courage, and stories of journeys she had taken. Her voice was calm and soothing, and Thomas found himself listening even when he didn't mean to. But it wasn't just peace that built their bond. Challenges came too. One day, Thomas discovered that one of the horses had injured its leg. It was a deep wound, and the horse struggled to stand. Thomas felt worry rise in him. An injured horse could mean days of difficulty, and he didn't want the animal to suffer. Before he could even ask, Naya stepped forward. "I can help," she said. "I know how to treat wounds." She prepared herbs she had gathered, mixed them with water, and gently applied them to the horse's leg. Her hands were steady and skilled. Thomas watched with admiration as she worked. She moved with confidence, whispering calming words to the horse. By the end of the day, the animal was resting comfortably. "You did good," Thomas said quietly. Naya gave a small smile. "We help each other." Those words stayed with him. They echoed in his mind long after the work was done. Little by little, Thomas realized he had begun looking forward to seeing them each day. He found comfort in Naya's quiet strength and Tavo's youthful energy. The loneliness that had lived with him for years began to fade. Something else took its place, something warm and steady. He wasn't sure what to call it yet. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas heard footsteps approaching. He stepped outside and saw three unfamiliar men near the barn. They looked rough, like travelers who had seen too many hard days, and their expressions were unfriendly. Thomas felt a sudden wave of protectiveness rise in his chest. For the first time in years, he had more than just a ranch to worry about. He had people he cared for, people who trusted him, people he needed to protect. The calm days had brought them all closer, but now something new stood on the horizon, something that would test the fragile bond they had built. And Thomas knew, deep in his heart, that he was no longer the lonely rancher he once was. He had changed, piece by piece, without even realizing it. Now, he would have to prove it. Thomas stepped forward slowly, his boots pressing into the dry soil as he approached the three men near the barn. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the hills, leaving the land covered in a deep orange glow. Naya and Tavo stood behind him near the porch, watching quietly. Thomas could sense their worry even without turning around. He felt it in the way the air shifted, in the stillness that settled over the ranch like a thin blanket. The three men glanced at each other, then at Thomas. Their clothes were dusty, their faces rough from long travel. They did not look friendly, but they did not appear lost either. It was the kind of look that made Thomas instinctively straighten his back, ready to stand his ground. "We're just passing through," one of them said. His voice was sharp, and he kept glancing toward Naya and Tavo. "We saw movement here. Didn't expect to find company." Thomas's jaw tightened. For years, he had lived alone, and no one cared who came or left his land. But now the idea of strangers staring at Naya and Tavo stirred something strong inside him. He felt a protective force rise like a quiet fire in his chest. "You've come far enough," Thomas replied calmly. "This is private land. If you need water or directions, say so. Otherwise, You should move on before dark. The man raised a brow. We were just wondering why an Apache woman and a child are staying here. Looks unusual for someone who lives alone. Naya's breath caught softly behind him. But Thomas didn't turn. He kept his eyes fixed on the men. That's not your concern, he said. They're here. Under my protection. The three men exchanged looks. One of them smirked slightly, as if trying to provoke Thomas. But Thomas didn't react. Instead, he stepped closer, closing the space between them. His voice remained steady, but there was a firmness that made the men pause. You should leave now, he said. The sun's almost down, and the path gets dangerous at night. You'll want to be on the road before then. For a moment, the men said nothing. Then the leader shrugged and took a step back. Fine. We don't want trouble. He turned around, motioned for the other two to follow, and within minutes, they were walking away into the dimming light. Thomas stood still until they disappeared beyond the trees. Only then did he turn toward Naya and Tavo. Naya's eyes met his, filled with quiet gratitude. Tavo clung to her, looking unsure, but safe. Are they gone? The boy whispered. Yes, Thomas said gently. They won't bother us again. He knew those words were more than comfort, they were a promise he intended to keep. Naya stepped closer. Her voice was soft, almost trembling from the rush of emotion. You didn't have to stand up for us like that, she said. But you did. Thomas shook his head. I couldn't let them scare you. You and Tavo, this is your home now. I won't let anything happen to you. Naya's eyes softened, and for the first time, she let herself truly relax. She placed a hand on Thomas's arm, a small gesture but filled with meaning. I trusted you the day I arrived, she whispered, and you proved I was right. That night, the ranch felt different. The danger had passed, but the moment had changed something deeply inside all three of them. Thomas sat by the fire with Naya and Tavo. The flames flickered softly, casting warm shadows on the walls. Tavo leaned against Naya, half asleep, while Thomas stared into the fire, thinking. He thought about the years he had lived alone, the long nights filled with silence, and the feeling of time passing without purpose. He thought about the cold dinners he used to eat by himself, the empty chair across the table, and the space inside him that had grown heavier over the years. And then he looked at Naya and Tavo. Now the house was filled with new sounds, the quiet humming of Naya as she cooked, the playful footsteps of Tavo running around the yard, the soft clinking of dishes as they shared meals together. The ranch no longer felt hollow. Every corner of it carried a bit of their presence. The change had come slowly, quietly, almost without him noticing. But now, sitting there with them, Thomas realized that life had given him something he didn't even know he needed. A family. The next morning, the sun rose bright and clear. The land sparkled with golden light. Thomas stepped outside and breathed in the fresh air. Naya was already awake, preparing breakfast, and Tavo fed the chickens happily, humming a tune he had invented himself. Thomas watched them, feeling something warm inside his chest. He had always thought of the ranch as his life's work, the one thing that gave him purpose, but now he understood that the ranch wasn't just a place to live, it was a place to build a life with others. After breakfast, Thomas took Tavo to the fields. He held the boy's small hands in his own, guiding him gently as they checked the fences. Tavo looked up at him with admiration, copying every step, every movement. It reminded Thomas of a time long ago, when he himself was a child, learning from his own father. Later, Naya joined them. She carried a basket of herbs and smiled softly when Thomas approached. They stood together watching Tavo run in the grass, laughing freely. He's happy here, Naya said quietly. He belongs here, Thomas replied. Then he added, more gently, and so do you. Naya lowered her eyes, touched by his words. I wanted a safe life for my son, she said. But I didn't expect to find a place that felt like home. Thomas took a slow breath. I didn't expect it either. But I'm glad you came. For a moment, they stood in silence, letting the wind move around them. It carried the scent of warm earth, fresh grass, and something else, something peaceful, like hope finally settling in. In the weeks that followed, the ranch flourished in ways Thomas had never imagined. Life became fuller. Evenings were filled with stories, laughter, and shared moments. Naya helped bring order and warmth to the house, and Tavo brought joy and life to every corner of the ranch. And Thomas grew into a man who no longer walked alone. One night, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in soft colors, Naya looked at him and said gently, "You've given us more than a home. You've given my son a future." Thomas shook his head. "You've given me a reason to live again." Naya reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. The touch was simple but full of meaning. It was the moment when their lives finally came together, fully, not as strangers, not as temporary companions, but as a family. The ranch no longer echoed with emptiness. It carried voices, warmth, footsteps, and the gentle sound of hope. The lonely days were gone. In their place stood new beginnings. Thomas, once a man who believed he was destined to walk through life alone, had found something worth holding on to. Naya and Tavo had brought light to his quiet world. And in return, he gave them safety, stability, and love. Not through loud words, but through actions, through presence, through the simple strength of being there. And from that day on, the ranch was no longer just Thomas's land. It was their home, built with trust, healed by kindness, and strengthened by the bond they had formed together.